If you've been following me for a while, you know that I have refinished a lot of furniture. From rescued curbside pieces to beautiful heirlooms that just needed a second chance. But not every makeover I've done has been met with applause. Some of my flips stirred a little debate. So today I'm revisiting my most controversial makeovers. The ones that made people ask, did she just ruin that? The truth is, sometimes I push the limits with color or texture or finish, and that's okay. These wacky or bold designs might not appeal to every buyer, but that's the beauty of furniture. Every layer tells a story, but it's not just paint that tends to get people talking. Quite often I'll go to restore something back to its original design, and people don't like that either. Sometimes people don't like the original hardware, or they just complain that I just turned it back into a brown box. It doesn't seem to matter what I do. It's not going to appeal to everyone, but I thought it would be a fun compilation to take the ones that have stirred up the most controversy over the years. And oddly enough, the majority of these were done in 2022 and 2023. Coincidence? Maybe, but let's get into it. My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. This is a super typical Facebook Marketplace find here in my area. You can find these all the time and they're usually pretty cheap. Not very many people like them in this condition. You can see the finish is pretty splotchy and just overall not that appealing. There's a ton of scratches on it and it was pretty dirty. So as always, first thing I did was clean it up. Now when I picked this up, I already knew that I was going to paint at least part of it. As always, I kind of go into these things with a bit of a plan, and then depending on what I find, that plan sometimes changes. It is a really solidly built piece, but the exterior wood is just not that nice. I don't mind the top hardware, so I'll probably reuse that, but I don't like these pieces here on the doors, so I'm going to try to figure something else out for that. I just find them a little too dated looking. After giving it a good dusting inside and out, I gave it a cleaning with some, I think I was using TSP here. And I'm going to be stripping the paint off the top and the drawers with this circa 1850 stripper. You can see the top here is pretty dinged up and scratched. I'm not really sure how this is going to turn out at this point, but I knew that I wanted to keep at least this top section wood grain. So you can see where that trim piece is there. Everything above that is getting stripped, and of course the drawers are included along that. So I'm going to be stripping those as well. It was a bit of work to get all of this off. Like I said, the quality of the wood is not that great, and this is at least on Facebook, very hotly contested what I'm doing here. I have so many people say, oh my God, you're scraping against the grain. I am not. The grain here on the side is vertical. The horizontal marks you see there were from the stripping pad that I was rubbing back and forth across it. But the wood grain itself, as you can see down below there, is vertical, not horizontal. I am not scraping against the grain in this situation. Now this is a veneer on the top. Some of these dings are pretty deep, but I'm going to do what I can to get them out. Sometimes sanding gets some of them out. You can also steam dents out with a little bit of water and an iron with a towel. Now you can see it's a bit discolored. Over there is the hutch top, which I'm going to be redoing separately, but you can see the discoloration even after the finish is removed. Now, were I doing this piece today, I probably would have kept the top light and done a completely different color scheme, but that's not what I did here. I decided to use a dark gel stain on the top. And for the bottom, I'm not going to be taking this all the way down to bare wood. It's not necessary. In fact, it's preferable that you keep some sort of finish under your paint. It keeps your paint from kind of going into the pores of the wood and making refinishing down the road a lot harder. Now initially I was going to use this color blue pine, but once I got it on and it dried, like you can see here, it looks a little bit kind of sage green, very bizarre. It dried quite blue and I just didn't care for the color. So you're gonna see me do a couple of different colors here trying to get the right fit. And in retrospect, looking back, I actually don't mind the blue, but at the time I did not like it. So I decided I was going to try a couple different greens instead. I didn't hate this super light one, but I didn't love it either. Were I doing this today, I actually really like this green. The blue looks nice, this dark green looks nice, but at the time I was not feeling it. I put one on each side so I could sort of compare. And then as I was sitting there contemplating my life choices, Andrea suggested, well, what if you mix the two colors? And that's what I opted to do. And it made this really pretty sort of in-between green. And that is what I ended up painting the piece. I added some water-based Minwax polyacrylic in satin to protect the wood and the drawers. And I used this little fuzz shaver thing here to kind of clean up the drawer insert. This would have held cutlery at one point and it was a bit kind of fuzzy, so I find this really helps clean them up. Once that was done, I used a little bit of furniture salve on the inside. It smells delicious and just kind of makes the wood look nice. And I did this on all of the drawers, not just that one with the green felt. Unfortunately, I forgot that I wanted to change the hardware here. I want to put these push latches instead so that you can just push on the drawer. It's going to kind of declutter the look. I find all the handles plus the ornate trim, is a little too much going on. So I had to fill those holes after the fact and repaint. Once that was done, I added a little bit of a beeswax hemp oil combo over top of the paint. This just sort of deepens the color and gives it a nice luster. And added just a little bit of gold touches to the hardware. Now looking back at what I started with, for some people this is totally fine, or they would have restored the entire thing to wood. I wasn't a huge fan of the wood grain, or that's probably what I would have done at that point, but there were so many scratches and I just wanted to give this a bit of an update. And did I succeed? I don't know. Like I said, if I were doing this piece over again today, I'm 100% sure I would have kept that top area light. And I think a lighter wood would have looked really nice with the green. I just find the dark, it turned out a little splotchy in areas. I mean, it already was splotchy, but it just kind of perpetuated the splotchiness. And I think a light wood would have looked a lot better with the green. So let me know what you think. We'll call this piece number 1. Let me know in the comments, would you have restored it all to wood? Would you have done the top light? Would you have done a different color entirely? I think this would be kind of a fun experiment as we go along with each video to see what you guys would have done. The main complaint about this across YouTube and Facebook is the green color not really going with the dark top. This little laminate dresser was done a couple years ago. I believe I did this on Halloween. It's in rough shape. The top in particular is absolutely ruined. It does have a partial solid wood frame. The drawers themselves are wood, but the side panels and the top panel is laminate, and we've got some issues with it. A couple of the drawers had some broken plastic guides, so those all have to be replaced, and this piece was super dusty and rusty. The caps on the bottom of the feet, there's no recovering this. You can't polish this away. So I'm gonna have to deal with that later. And even the plates that hold the feet were pretty rusted. So I'm gonna clean this up. Now this is not something that everyone does, but it's something that I personally like to do. I like to make sure every part of a piece is clean and fresh as much as possible, especially if I'm selling the piece. I am going to be giving this a good cleaning. I'm going to be painting part of it, including these sides, which are a bit loose, so I'm going to have to be gluing that laminate panel back down. As for the top laminate panel, this one is toast. There's no way to really save this. I could, try to patch it with Bondo, but it's just not worth it. So instead, I'm going to be scraping all this off. I'll sand the rest of it off a little bit later, and I'm going to be adding a new plywood top. Now these drawers are actually wood, but it's not the wood grain that you see here. This is a faux wood grain treatment to the wood, so it's very easy to sand off. This is not the same as veneer, and you can see it literally just comes right off. You can see that light brown primer layer that they apply, and then they do the faux wood grain on top. But the wood grain underneath is not what you're seeing in that dark brown color. As always, I like to clean up the inside of the drawers and do any repairs at the same time. And in this case, some of these plastic drawer guides need to be replaced. And I typically will add screws to those rather than staples. Now, some of the drawers had this awful drawer liner that was glued down, so scraper made pretty quick work of it. And then I just sanded the rest because the drawer bottom is a wood plywood. Now, one drawer had this huge hole in it. I'm not entirely sure why. I didn't see any evidence of a lock. So I'm not really sure what happened there, but I'm going to glue it back in so that it's permanent and then try to camouflage it as much as possible with some wood filler and sanding later on. This is what the leg looks like after being sanded down, including the middle. These are not solid brass feet, as you can tell. They are just plated and the plating has pretty much completely rusted off. So the best thing I can do is sand it down and give it a spray with some metallic paint. But first, I'm going to make sure all of this loose laminate is glued back down and clamped. And I also use this little multi-tool with a buffer wheel to clean up the plates that the legs screw into. Now, as for the color, I decided to do something that I had never done before. I think at this point, this was the first time I'd ever painted anything in purple. And it is a really pretty purple, I have to say. I don't believe they make this color anymore. I'd have to double check on that, but I think it was discontinued at one point. I'm going to be gluing the plywood top to the frame. This is not something you want to do if you're using a solid wood top because of wood movement, but plywood is dimensionally stable and is completely okay to do, much like those laminate panels were. Looks crazy, but this is what I had to work with at the time. And I just used some 150 grit sandpaper to clean up the plywood edges as well as the top. Added a few layers of this really pretty old spray paint, and this hardware is good as new. Now at this point, this is what I'm left with. I've got the light colored drawers and then the light plywood top. Now, what am I going to do with this, you ask? Well, let me show you what was in my mind. I thought I would do something a little crazy and design some sort of free-flowing forms. At this point, I had never done anything quite like this, and I've never done anything quite like it since. And this is a bit scary, but you know, it's fun to try new things every now and then. However, stuff like this is always super controversial. Because the top is plywood and the rest of it is birch, which does not stain very well, I opted to use a pre-stain conditioner on the parts that I'm going to be keeping wood. Sometimes this helps, sometimes it doesn't help a whole lot, and in this case it didn't really help a whole lot. I still got a fair bit of blotching from the stain, but you know, it is what it is. And here I am sitting looking at what looks kind of like a purple cow. This is not quite what I envisioned, and you know, I wasn't super happy with it. So I decided to make it better or worse, depending on who you are, by adding some freehand gold marker. Now, there is no real rhyme or reason or theme. This was just kind of free flowing, and oh, it's so funny watching this back now because the whole time I'm doing this, I was like, what are you doing? But, you know, for people that like whimsy and, you know, sort of non-traditional things, you know, I can see how this would be appealing. And actually, the person who did buy this was super, super happy with it. So that makes me happy. But overall, this was definitely one of those pieces that had a few people scratching their heads. Like I said, I released this, I believe it was Halloween Day in 2022. Now, was this something kind of unique and cool, or was it a total swing and a miss? You'll have to let me know down below what you think. We'll call this number 2. Is this a trick or is this a treat? Let me know. Now this was a cabinet that had a hutch top, and the bottom was partially solid wood, partial laminate. The wicker kind of look on the front is not real, it's plastic. And that one went over pretty well, but it's this hutch top that was pretty controversial. We've got solid wood on the outside. Like I said, this wicker looking stuff is plastic. And the glass doors, while normally are pretty easy to remove in cabinets like this, in this case, there was no way to remove the glass unless I actually took everything apart. Even Baby Nacho tried to help, but no go. To start this transformation, I tried to remove the back panel. There was one random screw and the rest was staples, and when pulling the last staple out, I unfortunately lost grip of it, dropped it, had a few things to say about that, and then had to assess the damage. Thankfully, it was just one corner, and I don't think it's going to be a big deal overall. I removed this trim piece because I'm not going to need it anymore. I'm going to be cutting the sides off right here at the bottom. This is upside down right now. And I'm going to be adding legs to it to make a freestanding cabinet. I started off initially just trying to sand the old finish off, but it was quite thick and it would have taken me forever. So I added some chemical stripper to eat through that pretty quickly. Once I had the majority of that thick old finish off, I was able to go in and sand with relative ease. And this top section was the last one, and there was this weird stain. It looked like wine or something. Thankfully, most of it was in the finish. A little bit had seeped through, but I think it's going to be okay with the finish that I'm going to be using. Elm is one of those woods that looks a little bit like oak, but I like to refer to it as oak's crazy cousin. It's got a bit more going on, and I like to use finishes that sort of bring that out. Now, I opted to use a light colored paint on this faux wicker here, and I'm going to be adding a little bit of a glaze over it later on to make it look a little bit older. And I like to use what I have on hand, so I had a little bit of this fabric looking repositionable wallpaper that I put on the inside of that back panel. As for the stain for the elm, I made up a couple testers of Odie's oil to see what I liked the best, and I really liked this kind of smoky color. It's called Up in Smoke. It's a pigment, and you mix it with a little bit of Odie's Safer Solvent and some Odie's oil, and you get this incredible stain that you have full control over in terms of opacity and color, and I really like using this stuff. It's non-toxic, and you don't need to wear a mask while you're using it. It actually smells fantastic. I use this inside and out, putting it on, wiping it back, and this is, like I said, you can see this crazy wood grain. I could have done something light here. Part of the controversy of this was, in fact, the color, or rather the combination of colors, which I'll talk about shortly, but the legs were probably the biggest controversy of all. Now, these hutch tops are very often turned into freestanding units, but they can be pretty tippy. So to kind of minimize that, I decided to splay these legs out slightly on a bit of an angle just to give it a little bit more of a footprint. And that had some people talking. There were many people that thought they would trip over it or that it just looked ridiculous. I have to say, you'd have to try pretty hard to trip over it, but I do understand that it does look a little bit weird, but I was just concerned about this being solid and, not tipping over on somebody. We ended up keeping this for, I think, pretty close to 3 years. I actually just decided to sell it recently when we were kind of moving some stuff around in our bedroom. I don't mind the blonde legs with the smoky stain. I think what's bothering me is the color of that back panel. I'm not sure that it works. I feel like something a bit more neutral would have worked better overall. What do you guys think? We'll call this piece number 3. Let me know down below what you would have done or changed. I think this also would have looked really cool if I'd kept the elm light, like its natural color. It would be very similar to the legs. I think that would have looked okay with that blue panel on the back, but then what would I have done with the fake wicker? This is a combination of choices that kind of left me thinking, well, I'm not sure, but the person who ended up buying this fairly recently really likes it, so I mean, that's what's important, but I'd still like to hear what you guys think. This next little dresser definitely stirred up some anger in some people. This is a fairly common Depression era piece. It's got beautiful nap joinery and this wood grain that everybody seems to think is courtesan oak. It's not. This is a faux wood grain, and this was very common in that period of time when real courtesan oak was not available or it was too expensive, so they would take these cheap, usually pine or poplar dressers, and they would faux paint grain on top of it. Now, that in itself can be a bonus for somebody, but when it's not in good shape, it is difficult to repair, though it's not impossible. But in most cases, it's just not worth it. And with this specific little piece, that was the case. I know that this was technically done to make cheap furniture look more expensive, but in the end, it is still cheap furniture, and I just don't love the look of the faux wood grain. This did have casters initially, but most of them were gone. There was only one that was fully intact. And the second controversial thing about this was that I was using diagonal side cutters to pry these out. I have that pair specifically for jobs like this, so it's okay. Andrea's an electrician, and the first time she saw me use side cutters like that, she almost had a heart attack, but she understands now why I use them. So for beginners, this is sometimes hard to spot. For me, I can spot it 50 feet away. I can tell if something's fake or real. But if you're not sure, just take a little bit of lacquer thinner or something like that in a fairly inconspicuous spot, and if it comes off, you know that it's obviously painted on. Now you can still see a little bit of shadowing underneath. That's just stained into the pine, but that will come off. This top did have quite a bit of staining underneath the old finish, but I don't necessarily want to take all of that out. I'd like to keep a bit of the character of this piece, even though I am cleaning it up. So I'm not going crazy with the sanding. I just did a light hand sanding here, and I'm going to be doing a couple of treatments on the top. The first thing I'm doing is using a penetrating stain, which hopefully will help camouflage some of that staining that was left over. Once that was finished and dried, I went in with a gel stain, and the gel stain is going to sit a little bit more on the surface and camouflage those areas even more. And you'll see the third step a little bit later on. As far as the sides, I'm going to be painting them. But I don't necessarily want to paint directly on this raw pine. Pine tends to leach tannins, which can affect your paint, so it's always a good idea to seal before you paint over pine. I did clean up the drawer boxes a bit. I'm not a fan of the rustic feel of some of these drawers, especially if I'm putting clothes in it. I don't want anything that's going to snag materials and possibly tear them, so I do like to clean them up. This old lock was pretty rusty, so I gave it a bit of a rust bath just to try to clean that up a bit and made a few repairs on the drawers. There is one drawer that needs a significant repair, and you'll see that shortly. Now, the original hardware was gone, so I went out and I found some new hardware that I thought would look really nice with the patina that was on the lock escutcheon that was remaining on the piece. And if you remember blue pine from the very first video in this compilation, I decided to give it a shot on this piece. I did want to use it somewhere, so I did use it here. To seal the top and tint it just a little bit more, make it a little bit warmer, I used some Varathane tinted finish on the top. Now I have a stash of old skeleton keys, and I did find one that worked in the lock, but it's just a bit stiff, so I'm going to add a little bit of, I think I used WD-40 on that just to kind of lubricate things. So here's where we're at this point. I've got, I think, 2 coats of paint on this already. The drawers are cleaned up except for the one that needs a lot of work. And over this paint, I'm just using a little bit of a beeswax hemp oil polish. Just kind of deepens the color, and I like the luster that it leaves. Now, unfortunately, this drawer is broken here, so it doesn't slide properly. I could have tried to add just a sliver of wood there to build that up, but I decided to make things hard for myself and redo this whole side because at some point some bugs got in here and basically ate it. So the integrity of this side of the drawer is just not great, so I'm going to redo it. Now, I don't have the machinery to make this nap joinery like it would have been made initially, so I'm going to have to do this by hand, and let me tell you, it was quite a challenge. Basically, I just traced the pattern out, tried to cut it out, drilled holes where there were holes, and then obviously had to make the rebates and dados and everything so that the drawer pieces would all fit together. I also had to make a new back panel for the drawers, so I just made that out of plywood. That drawer bottom had a split in it, so I cleaned these up, glued the two pieces together, clamped them, and then was able to assemble everything. I used that same stain that I used on the top on the inside of the drawers. I used a little bit of Rub and Buff here on the block just to try to match the keyhole escutcheon on the outside. And I added a little bit of antiquing glaze to the paint and later on the lock as well, just to kind of make this look a little bit older and help it match the new hardware that I bought for it. Now, some of you are going to prefer this before, maybe not with those handles in that condition, but I understand that. Overall, I generally don't have a problem painting these little dressers, especially if they're in rough shape like this. If it's just a matter of repairing a few little spots, you know, I may be inclined to do that, but when pretty much the entire thing is rough, I don't necessarily look at this as a super significant piece of history. Mind you, there are pieces from this era that would be, so I just kind of play it by ear, piece by piece. Absolutely love the super shiny finish on the top. It's not a look I normally go for. Usually I try to go for something a bit more satin, but on this piece, that's just what I decided to do. So let me know what you think of this makeover, whether you clutched your pearls when I removed that old faux wood grain pattern, or if you like this little glow up. This would be perfect in like a cottage or a guest room, a narrow hallway, somewhere where you need a little bit more storage but can't really fit a huge piece. I hope that you enjoyed this little walk down memory lane. Most of these pieces you haven't seen in compilations before, and it is specifically because they were so controversial to begin with, so I feel like they needed their own compilation. I'm still healing from my table saw injury on my thumb, so I wasn't able to bring you a new piece of furniture. I don't have the dexterity yet, so I thought this compilation would be kind of fun. And there's a view of my attempt at nap joinery by hand. It's not perfect, but you know, it did the trick, and this little piece should hold up well for quite some time. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, you might like this video here.